Welcome to another book highlight. We have now reached chapter 22, and in this chapter, we are back with Jonathan in Saul's war camp, and Jonathan is finally made aware of the day he and his father are going to die. In a final act of rebellion against God, Saul consulted a witch and made her conjure up the spirit of the prophet Samuel to find out what would happen in the ensuing battle with the Philistines at Gilboa, and Samuel confirmed that Saul and Jonathan and most of their army would die and the Philistines would temporarily consume the land. So now Jonathan is smacked in the face with the harsh, cold slap of finality. Jonathan understands that Saul going to a witch was the ultimate final act of rebellion, and he's devastated that his father would do that when he's had so many chances to humble himself and repent and ask for God's mercy. He's basically sealed the fate of his sons and his army. And in my novels, Jonathan had a word from God. He knew that they would die together, he and his father, but now it's a certainty, and Jonathan is reeling. Now, so is Saul, but at this point, Jonathan is grappling with the fact that Saul brought this wrath down on the whole family and threatened their whole family line. And Jonathan is dealing with something maddening here, and I can imagine the persecuted church deals with this a lot. What happens when you've been faithful to God with your life, choosing his will over yours, even to the neglect of your own personal safety and comfort, and you're not being rescued in the natural? Maybe you're being sentenced to death, or you're not being healed, or you're stripped of your homeland, or you lose something you never imagined God would require you to lose. It's the finality of a door you were hoping to keep open, but now it's shut for good. That's what Jonathan is experiencing. In the last chapter, Jonathan was still grieving the possibility and trying to keep a level head so that he could prepare his son and his nurse for what they might have to escape. But now the certainty of death and the unraveling of all of his hopes is revolting. He doesn't know if he can ask for mercy or alter what God has said will happen. Now, no matter what level of devastation we've experienced, we can attest to the fact that the closed door slammed in your face is crushing when there's no physical way out, and it's so wrong and so painful, but God doesn't seem to be rescuing you. That's galling. Now, I'm still learning a lot. I'm not there yet, but I'm learning layers of this lesson that I want to talk about today. And I'm so glad I wrote this book when I did, because I didn't have this understanding years ago. Walking through devastation, even if it's the valley of the shadow of death itself, there is a measure of closeness with God that you only experience there. I'm convinced that Christians who suffer excessively for the gospel are given a measure of grace and intimacy with God than others have, if they're willing, because God is close to the brokenhearted. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. There's a comfort that only comes through mourning. And one of the major points in Jonathan's story that I talk about in the Bible study is that the key to surrender through devastation comes from an absolute decision to trust God's unchanging character. A couple things I want to point out. First of all, Jonathan's surrender. His radical acceptance is what I'm going to call it. Now, radical acceptance is a concept that is for daily life, not just crazy stuff like this. Radical acceptance says, I don't have to like or understand what's in front of me, but I'm not going to fight it. I'm not going to allow my questions to derail me and make me reevaluate who I am and who God is. God's character must be the bedrock that we stand on. And that's where Jonathan what he falls back on, where he gets his shred of hope and strength. One of my favorite lines from this chapter is Jonathan says, anguish still groans beneath the surface, but the shred of hope I get from saying Yahweh's name is enough to silence the torment. And that's what separates pain from hell. In hell, there's no name and presence of God to silence the torment. But through pain, we can still wonder, how is God allowing this? But we can still cry out to him, and he is near to us. Answers don't always help, which is why we have to be careful not to theorize each other's pain too much, because in the moment, we really just want a way out. We want comfort. We want to reverse the damage. But true comfort only comes from the heart of the Father and from God's presence. So Jonathan reestablishes himself on God's character as he's reeling with the understanding that, oh my goodness, now I've got to absorb the fact that my father, my king, sentenced us all to death, basically, and now I'm going to have to walk into that tomorrow. He steadies himself on the unchanging promise of God to honor the legacy of his faithful children. Jonathan chooses to recognize the mercy of God, that God enabled him to befriend David, and now their covenant of brotherhood is going to save Israel and Jonathan's son, Mephi. And later we'll see that Mephi was the only one of Saul's descendants that survived. Another line that I love from this chapter is Jonathan is savoring the rise and fall of his own chest. As he's calming down, he's trying to rest in the mercy of now. So even if all the mercy you receive in the present moment is just knowing God is with you in it, that is enough to get you through. And it's more than people have without God. It's our only hope. When you have no way out and you are forced, when, like Corrie ten Boom said, God is your only option, and you're forced to face the thing in front of you and no one is rescuing you from it, you understand how powerful God's presence and name can be. Now, this is why I wanted to write this character and write him well in preparation for this moment. Everything I've learned about Jonathan and that we've learned about him is coming forth in his death, because I wanted people to see a biblical man who is faithful to God, who died a tragic death, because it seems like a strange thing. We're used to happy endings for faithful people. We want to see Goliath fall. But I wanted people to look at Jonathan's life in the face and just receive all of it and see God's hand on him, which is beautiful. And I believe that's what gave Jonathan hope. God bound him and David together, and God honored their legacy to save Israel. And Jonathan got to support the king who would be the famous father of the Messiah's legacy. Jesus was the son of David. Jonathan's dreams were fulfilled beyond his life. His dreams for David, for Israel, for his son were fulfilled beyond his lifetime. We often assume that if God gives us callings and anointings, we think, okay, if I'm faithful, he'll make sure everything is fine. So we sort of bargain with him. We say, well, if I give you a measure of my faithfulness, I expect a certain level of success and comfort within my lifetime in return. And if that doesn't happen, we feel like we failed. But what Jonathan shows us is that God is still faithful and honors his promises, even if it's beyond your natural life, which we find out in Hebrews 11. Our callings do not rise and fall with us. They're not just to make us Christian celebrities. Our callings don't have much to do with our elevation over others. Our lives are meant to express the beauty of commitment to God, and our legacies, like Jonathan's, can be honored by the Lord as we're part of his greater plan, when we're willing to be part of his greater plan in spite of what that might look like for us. This is intensely beautiful and painful and something we all desperately need to see. If we're living in a place where we see the gospel as something that just keeps us safe and comfortable, and we treat obedience like a bargaining chip with God for our own comfort, we're missing a lot of the depth and beauty of the gospel, and we're even missing what Jesus went through for our sake. Hebrews says Jesus himself offered up loud cries and tears to the Father who could save him from death, and even though he went to the cross, he was heard because of his reverence. So if Jesus could be the sinless Son of God and yet could submit to being made perfect through suffering, there's value in that. He paved the way for us, and there's an element of that we were meant to understand and not circumvent. There's mystery in Jonathan's life and mystery in Jesus's life that saved us, that we are sorely missing by trying to escape everything. Jonathan's life teaches us we don't need to lose our trust in God when our path doesn't make a bit of sense and it's racked with pain and questions. We can still stay faithful to God and remember Jesus, who endured so much hostility against sinners and yet did not give up. Jesus is the one that paved the way for us to walk this kind of faithful path, even when it's crazy hard. And in that way, Jonathan was a type of Christ. He teaches us the true mark of a spiritual warrior, which is that our story, does not end with our death.